My life story, so that you got a feel for where I'm coming from. Not a pretty story. Grew up in New Brunswick in a toxic family. Raised in this town while my dad tried to start a computer business. I was born in 1983. His business kind of failed. My mom got another kid. I think they were on welfare. I'm probably sure they don't want me to tell you that, but things weren't working out. And my grandfather owns a mechanic sort of place, an engine rebuilding place, and an auto parts store. Offered my dad a job. So come back home, son. And my dad took the opportunity. The problem was my mother didn't want to. She liked the idea of marrying a guy who was gonna start his own business and they were gonna run away from their families. My mother and my father's mother hated each other, and I don't really have too many memories between the ages of 1 and 3 at that first town where I was starting life out. But I do remember my mother just kind of went crazy. I do sort of remember, I don't really have very many memories of positive times with my mother. She went to the workforce, which she never thought she was going to do. She thought she was going to marry some businessman guy. And she couldn't handle the stresses of the workforce. And she'd come home every day screaming and yelling, and it wouldn't really seem to matter what we would do. It was always about her and her emotions and her stresses, and we were all bad most of the time. It was my dad who was all bad. She would scream to my father on a pretty well evenly basis that she wanted to get the hell out of our family. She wanted to find a new life. She made a mistake having kids. She made a mistake marrying him. And she just wanted to leave, and that was what always happened. So, you know, I sort of like constructed this idea that if I had never been born, then none of this chaos would exist. None of this pain, none of this torture, none of this feelings of not being wanted, not being loved. If I could just eliminate myself somehow, I would be able to solve this problem. And I would pray for death. I would contemplate death. I would contemplate suicide and what it would be at a very, very young age. I can't remember exactly when it began. uh, I had an experience when I was approximately 11 years old. In between the ages of grade 6 and 7, I believe it was, where I was enjoying my life. I was out with my friends, and we were having such a great time, and I myself, whatever the hell's wrong with me, didn't feel comfortable just sitting and talking with my friends. I needed to go climb up a tree, and while I was climbing this tree, I just thought, how this is just so weird how happy I am. Why is this happening? Like, I feel so lucky. Like, I probably don't deserve this. It probably, almost certainly, isn't going to last. And as I climbed the tree, I contemplated how, yeah, even this girlfriend that I have right now, she'll probably just turn out to be an insane person who hates me and just destroys my life and makes me a miserable person like my father. That this won't last. This must have been how my father got into the whole thing with marriage in the first place. And my friend saw me up in the tree, and I was really, really high up. And one of the girlfriends, not the girl I was dating, but the girl next door to me, she said, who grew up next door to me, she said, come down out of that tree, Travis. And I started at that moment to just sort of blurt out a little bit of what was going in my mind. I started saying things like, well, what would it matter if I fell to the tree? Life, It's just like, there's no better time to die than right now, or something like that. They didn't like what I said. They didn't even say anything else. They just got up and walked away, and I found myself alone in that tree. I climbed down the tree. I walked home. When I got home, I sat under the tree in my front yard, kind of wondering what all just happened. And my dad, he just come home, and apparently he went looking for me because my girlfriend's mom called him and said that I was talking about suicide and jumping out of a tree. My dad, he got out of his car and kind of hollered over across the yard to me. Is everything okay, bud? And I said, yeah. And he said, okay. And he went inside. We never talked about it again. Well, I mean, I tried to talk about it here in my adulthood, realizing how I think it's a pivotal moment in my life, and I think, my dad sort of owed me a little bit more of a conversation than that at the time, and, well, my dad just tells me that I'll keep that part to myself. Anyway, I learned from that experience, My friends, they didn't really want to hang out with me anymore. My girlfriend broke up with me and never went back out with me again. And everybody around the neighborhood that I used to hang out with kind of just looked at me a little bit differently. And I sort of started moving towards a new set of friends and a different sort of set of things I was interested in, skateboarding and other things. And but I realized, not necessarily consciously, but that these things in my head about suicide and these negative voices in my head, nobody wants to talk about it. As a matter of fact, I become the sort of weird guy, the enemy, the guy that you can't approach for talking about how I feel about my experiences in my life, or the thoughts in my head. They became to me, known to be unacceptable for the most part for the rest of my life. I kept my ideas of suicide to myself. As a matter of fact, I was just telling one of my friends a couple of years ago, about my suicidal history, and he said, geez, man, I didn't even know this about you. And it's like, wow, you've been my best fucking friend for how long? And I never told you this? Or, I don't know. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I just been sort of keeping this shit to myself. I've come up with hundreds, probably, of different strategies, very elaborate plans on how to kill myself with nobody noticing, how to kill myself where the body is burnt and disappears, and I just disappear. No one knows I committed suicide. No one. All kinds of different suicide plans. Some actually very public, jumping off a bridge with a rope and fucking hanging in front of the whole city. Amongst them, it's kind of hard to move on from that when suicide is such a stigmatized topic. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody's comfortable with it. And they, especially nowadays, think that since I'm white, I should be privileged, and there's no way that I could be a victim. So, oh yeah, plus a strong guy, never talks about his feelings, never cries, blah, blah, blah. All the regular crap. Just suck it up, buttercup, be a normal man, and deal with it like everyone else deals with their shit, right? And I'm not saying I had the worst, There's people who had it way worse than me. In a way, I feel like I'm fucking lucky as hell because I'm still here. I had enough self-confidence from my father, from from wherever it came from my grandmother especially. Um, yeah, my grandmother was a big part of what has sort of like constructed who I am. I would go to her house to visit when I was a kid, and she would just talk about love and acceptance and Jesus and God and heaven and like she just knew how to love like I had never felt. And I don't think I actually would have been able to make it if I hadn't had her. Like she was like every summer this thing would happen where I'd sort of get refueled and I'd come back from her house and I'd pray for however many months before I've, you know, got frustrated because nothing ever seemed to go my way. It just sort of gave me this sense that, like, no matter what, like, the choice of hatred and this choice of hurt uh, isn't a solution to being hurt, you know? Um, so much of my family were all so damaged and hurt that we spread it, right? We don't deal with it. We say I'm hurt, so therefore you need to hurt too. That's pretty much the premise of my family. um, from where I sit, anyhow. See what I mean? It's not a nice story, but I mean, like, there's like good parts to it, right? I dropped out of high school. I became a drug addict. My theory was like, once I get away from this family, I'm gonna go and get a job, like everybody does. They have jobs, and I was pretty good at getting jobs. I wasn't very good at keeping them, but I always was sort of like, from every time I got a new job, I just kept on going to get a better and better job. This was like a 10-year cycle. You know, I'm so fucking all over the place here. Um, yeah, I had this first job working as a dishwasher, and I was 16. It wasn't really my first job. It was my first legitimate job on paper, social insurance number, and all that. I had some under the table sort of like cash jobs, things I did as a teenager to put some cash in my pocket here and there through my life. My first real job, I was a dishwasher. Within about 3 months, I think it was, I was promoted to line cook. And, after about a year and a quarter, I knew all the different positions in the whole kitchen. And this was a huge kitchen. It served upwards of 2,000 people on a Sunday. It was a big truck stop restaurant, busiest truck stop restaurant in all of the Maritimes. Um, when I got the job, they introduced me to this guy named Timmy, and they said, "This guy's Timmy. He's the best dishwasher we got. You need to learn from him." This guy was a bit special. I think he was probably touch autistic or something like that. He had this thing where he actually thought he was a cat and would ask for milk to be brought to him in steel bowls by the waitresses, and he would lick the milk out of the bowls. And that's that story with that guy. But he was super fast in the dish pit. No, he was super fast in the dish pit, and they said nobody can run the dish pit with only one helper on a Sunday, only Timmy. And I eventually learned how to be able to do it all by myself on a Sunday. And as a matter of fact, just to brag, because I like to brag, I don't have much to brag about, so I really like to take advantage of what I do. um, my dish pit, despite even being able to step it up and have no helpers, was even cleaner. The dishes that came out of the dish pit were cleaner. The dish pit was more organized. I was able to keep the pots and pans and everything still in the hands of the people who needed it during the Sunday rush, all by myself. And I got a whole bunch of other stupid fucking, oh, I'm so great stories about that job. But the point of that job was that it paid $5.75 an hour at the beginning. And there was a point when the government stepped up and said, we're going to increase the minimum wage in New Brunswick, and they put it up to $5.90 an hour. And at the time, I was going to high school. At the time, I was trying to think that I was going to be a motocross racer. And I was trying to take all the money I made from dishwashing and put it into an endeavor to be a motocross racer. I couldn't even afford with a full-time job working at this place to keep tires and gas in a bike, let alone like go to the races and all that stuff. Motocross racing is expensive. You can't do it unless you're rich. I learned that. It was a big waste of money, big waste of time. And when I went to my boss after about a year and a quarter, being like one of the go to guys in the kitchen, you could just get me to go do anything and I would get it done. And I said, hey, boss man, like, look at me. I'm here working 40 hours a week, going to high school, trying to do all these things with my life, and you're still paying me minimum wage after a year and a quarter. The boss's response was, you're going to high school, so therefore you're considered a part-time employee. I said, I'm putting in 40 hours a week. That makes me a full-time employee. He said, no, sorry. Because you're also going to school, you you can't get a raise. Only after you're done school, or if you quit school, will we consider giving you a raise. Like, I thought this is the most hilarious ultimatum. For a dead-end job, if you quit, we'll give you a 25-cent raise. And I was so offended that I just wrote a note. About a week later, set it on the boss's table and walked it out in the middle of my midnight shift, and never looked back. Every job I got after that was better paying, better paying, better paying. I noticed that, wow, if you push yourself to not settle, you could prove that you could advance in the world with hard work. It was working very well for me when I was young. So I was feeling very motivated, like in that way, getting out of high school, getting that first job, because, I felt like, you know, I can prove that I didn't need a high school diploma, blah blah blah. Because you're really looked down upon in my family for not getting a high school diploma, because nobody has a university degree in my family, right? So all of a sudden now the high school diploma is like this thing. It's oh, well, I got my diploma. It's one of the things my grandmother would have criticized my mother for when my dad married her, is the fact that she was also a high school dropout, right? And my mother took that to heart, and she needed to go back to school while I was in grade 3 and my brother was in kindergarten. And she went to high school, and now the needs of the children were no longer. This was really the tipping point of like, there's no turning back. There's no more children. It's all me. This is my mother's thing, where she went to high school. She didn't get a GED. She literally went down to the school that me and my brother were going to. And like, so I don't know if you can imagine what that's like in a small town, like an adult woman sitting in a classroom with a whole bunch of fucking teenagers. Oh yeah, well the school allowed it. But I don't know, in my opinion, it's like, do you think that really is what the teenagers in their life needed? Is like, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe they learned a good lesson from it. All I know is that my mother struggled in school, and now my dad didn't help us with our homework. He helped her with her homework. And I mean, good for her, right? She's trying to better herself and maybe, try to be seen in a better light in my grandmother's eyes. But at the end of the day, she didn't do a goddamn thing with her high school diploma. She just went right straight back to waitressing and didn't push herself anything beyond that. So it's basically absolutely pointless. I mean, that's kind of where I sit with that diploma at the moment. I dropped out of high school, and I've considered GEDs and other paths in my life. The problem is that life doesn't really allow you to take time off to go to school, as far as I can tell. Once you get into life, you gotta keep on paying for your habits, paying for your food, paying for the things that you want to do. And if you stop doing that, you'd be a homeless person. And I know that because I've done that before with drugs. I stopped doing the things I'm supposed to do and became a completely homeless person, staying at the homeless shelters, staying in apartment complex stairwells. Um, it's the lowest part of my life. It's basically what I did. I came out of high school. I got these jobs. But at the end of the work week, when the paycheck came, I always spent it on drugs and alcohol. Drugs and alcohol to the point where I became an addict of many different drugs and a serious alcoholic. And yeah, I mean, I worked at high school in call centers and warehouses, and then manufacturing plants, manufacturing anything from bags to toilet paper to boxes. Nothing too complex. Basically, your job doing these things is just sweeping the floor and taking direction from one of the people who's been there a long time. Um, in 2006, my brother came back from Alberta. He left for Alberta the year before. He found a job in the oil sands of Alberta with my uncle. They did pretty well. It was a boom year in Alberta. They both found jobs as laborers and made twice the kind of money you could make in New Brunswick. And my brother came home and he saw me in New Brunswick. He saw that I was just kind of a loser, kind of just a drunken drug addict. And he said, "Hey man, why don't you come out to Alberta? I can get you a job." So I said, "Sure. Why the hell not? I got nothing else going on." And that's what I did. I went and got a job. Made some money, found a girlfriend in Fort McMurray. Thought she was the love of my life instantly. She was so cool and funny and fun and beautiful. And I just fell head over heels for her. Man, I wanted to marry her right away. And had sex with her once, got gonorrhea and chlamydia. Told her about this. She said it wasn't true. I must have got it from somewhere else. I explained, well, I wasn't having sex with anyone else, so it's probably you. You better go get checked out. And then I was in the process of moving into this place with these guys and quitting my job in the oil sands and working as a carpenter in Fort McMurray. And things didn't work out with her, and I said some prick shit to them because, come to find out, they were some of the guys sleeping with her while we were dating that gave her the gonorrhea and the chlamydia, or maybe, who knows, maybe just caught it from her too. Either way, I went back to try to patch things up, realizing that, hey man, they didn't have any commitments with me. The girl was the one lying to me. The girl was the one, like, I don't care. You're just guy, right? You get drunk, some girl comes on to you, you go with it, right? Or, maybe you loved her more than I did, and so therefore you thought it was okay to protest your love, whereas there was no marriage. Or whatever the thing was, I was going over to this place to ask for forgiveness and patch things up, because they were kind of the only friends I had in Fort McMurray at the time. They did not accept my offer. They beat the shit out of me. I went home, absolutely beat on a bicycle. I think it was my bicycle. Can't remember. And then, so, to make things worse, the new place that I had found, within about a week of moving in, the landlord came to me and said, "My son is allergic to cigarette smoke. And he's been having noticeable flare-ups with his conditions because he can smell the cigarette smoke that I bring into his home. And he needs me to move out immediately. He will refund my rent, no hard feelings. It's just for the health of his son." So What happened was I phoned one of the previous people that I had phoned because I had phoned all around Fort McMurray looking for a cheap place to stay. Just prior to that, I got back on the phoned one of the other numbers. There was this lady, she had a place in her apartment building in Fort McMurray, an empty room. Even though that's illegal, she was going to rent it out to me for $700 a month. So what happened was I moved all my crap down to her place downtown Fort McMurray, and that's where things went for a little while until I met her crackhead boyfriend. I could say his name was Kevin. Nobody would care, right? I'm not telling anybody too much here. Some big friggin' motherfucker named Kevin. She'd go out of town and he'd smoke crack and break all her rules, and kind of got me into this bad set of habits at the apartment. It is what it is. I went out and smoked weed on the balcony, and uh, you know, uh, weed was illegal back then. The landlord sort of like came to me and said, "You can't stay here anymore." And the reason she gave me for this was that, oh, she recently found out that it was never legal for her to rent out the other room in her apartment, that that's not something that's not allowed on her lease, and that people in the building had reported her, and she's been asked to get me to leave. But there's no problem because just down the road she happens to own a trailer that she rents out the rooms of. And I can move in there and I don't have to pay her any extra rent, and I'll still have a place to stay, and that'll be fine. So I moved into this place. I moved all my crap there. I had a bicycle. I had a bunch of beer with me at the time. And before I woke up the next morning, my bicycle was gone. My beer. They managed to come in my bedroom in the middle of the night while I was sleeping, steal my beer without waking me up. My 2-4 beer was gone. I go into the living room and there's like all these people that I don't recognize, and everybody's still up from the night before, and everybody's smoking crack. It only took a few months of me being in this building before I participated in the crack smoking that occurred there on a daily basis. I basically lost all my personal belongings. The employment that I was trying to get failed. I bought a car from a lady down the road. The car never worked properly. Excuse me a second, I gotta use the wash.